Legacy Partners Exit Readiness Podcast. Today's guest is attorney and author Stuart Sorkin. Stuart has represented buyers and sellers in M&A transactions here in the Washington, D.C. area for more than 25 years. He specializes in M&A, but also asset protection and estate planning. He has a JD from the University of Miami Law School, an LLM from Georgetown University, and he's also a CPA. Stuart co-authored the book, Expensive Mistakes When Buying and Selling Companies and How to Avoid Them in Your Deals, with co-author Richard Staglitz. Stuart, thank you for joining us today. I want to highlight 3 of those expensive mistakes on this podcast today, but if there was one expensive mistake that you've seen more than any other in your years of practice, what would it be?
I would say that probably the biggest mistake most entrepreneurs make is spending 98% of their time, or 99% of their time working in their business and 1% on their business. Mm-hmm. They do not, the entrepreneur needs to focus some time on what he wants the business to be. And I think that's probably the number one mistake I see when I work with clients, is they really don't know what they want their business to be.
Yeah, and so when that happens, when you've seen that happen, Stuart, what are the consequences for not taking a step back, if you will, and working on the business as much as you're working in it?
Well, I think the big issue is that you may not. Clearly, there are cases where you won't receive the value. There are clearly cases where deals have failed, and people have this conception that, oh, I just got an LOI, I'm going to sell my business. Well, people don't realize that 60% of the deals that go to LOI don't close. And a large percentage of them is because of due diligence issues. So failure to prepare for due diligence prior to sale could be a very costly mistake.
Yeah, what would be a couple of areas of due diligence that you've seen? If you've seen 2 or 3 areas of due diligence that are typically not in order, what would they be?
Clearly, around finances is clearly one area. Documentation regarding employee manuals, etc., is another. Are probably 2 of the big ones, and then failure to properly disclose to a buyer if something is happening currently with the business that could affect positively or negatively on the sales process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in the work that we do, Stuart, we see this often where the business owner, they're so busy in the day-to-day, they're up to their eyeballs and just making sure, putting out fires and making sure the lights are on and the product is produced, the service is produced and gotten out the door and sales are made. And they don't always have a whole lot of time for that taking that strategic look at the business, working on it more than in it. What kind of counsel have you given business owners through the years when it comes to this whole piece of working on the business as much as working in it?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to get someone focused on, and that is, one, what is the purpose of what is the value of the what is the entrepreneur need to retire or exit? Mm-hmm. What's he going to do after he exits? And that would affect the plan of how you develop this business, and explaining to him, if you don't, every businessman exits their business in one of 6 ways. They sell it to family, they sell it to management, they sell it to a third party, they become an absentee owner, it gets liquidated, or they die. And if they do not choose one of the first 4, the last 2 automatically will happen. So every businessman exits his business. It's whether or not he's got the plan for it. And the other piece is, since a lot of clients end up selling their business to employees, one of the things that I think is missed if they do not work on the business is, if you are all of a sudden going to be the largest creditor of your former company, what kind of credit risk do you put on the company if you're not there? And if it's not high, then what should you do to build that ability so when you do sell it, the likelihood of you getting paid is fairly high?
Yeah, good. So the first mistake that I wanted to ask you about was mistake number 2. And I think it plays into what you're talking about here because it has to do with goals and objectives. Vague exit strategy, mistake number 2. Tell us about that and what exactly you mean by that.
Well, first off is simple premise. Exit strategy begins the day you start your business, because if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? So you have to decide, what is the purpose of what you're doing this? And even companies that are not necessarily in the sale mode should be doing this in the sense of, at least, where do they want the business to be 5 years from now? And obviously that can change, but the idea is figuring out, what it is that you're going to want to potentially exit, or what your goal is for that exit. If you are approaching an exit strategy, it's real clear that there are 2 other questions that have to be answered. One is, what is the amount of money that you need to survive for the rest of your life comfortably and do what you want to do? And 2 is, what are you going to do when you retire? If you're going to do this serially and do this again, then there's different things you need to consider regarding creditor protection, so if the next deal doesn't work out as well, you haven't risked everything on the table. If it is a permanent exit, then you need to know once you know what you need financially, then you can look and say, okay, what is the value of my business, and how does that compare to what I need? If you're in a favorable mode, or that your business is more valuable, then you can do some asset protection, some estate planning, and pass some of that on, that appreciation on to your children. If you're not there, you have to make a decision. How are you going to get there?
Would you agree then, Stuart, that an owner, in order not to have a vague exit strategy, they need an accurate gap analysis with an accurate valuation of their business as well as an accurate financial planning number?
Yes, exactly. Because otherwise, how do you know? I've had situations, as an example, where someone's gap analysis was positive, and because he was more legacy-oriented, he decided to sell the business for less than probably what the value was, because he wanted his employees to have it, and by knowing what his number is, he could do it. Obviously, I've had situations the other way where there was this inflated sense of value, and then it becomes an issue, okay, how do we get you there? How do we raise you 30 or 40% in the next 5 years in some reasonable fashion, or is that an unreasonable goal, and how do we achieve that goal? So yes, I think current valuation is very important.
Okay, so Stuart, mistake number 4, getting soft advice or none at all. What do you mean by that?
Let's put it this way. Many business owners have their CPA and their attorney who they use for everything. The issue is familiarity in that sense means they are more concerned potentially about keeping the client relationship than they are necessarily challenging you. Dick, who is my co-author, said there was a major difference between a board of advisors and a board of directors. With a board of advisors, there is no hammer that they have on the owner of the business. With a board of directors, as Dick said, if my directors didn't make me feel uncomfortable asking me questions that I needed to think about, then they weren't the right members of my board, because that's who is supposed to be challenging you. On the other side of the coin is that many CPAs and attorneys, while they may be fine in general dealing with general business, if they are not an expert in M&A work, understanding what it is that you're trying to do to add value to your business. what are the things that are important, and they don't necessarily bring them up because it's not their normal practice area. So that's why I believe it's important to bring in consultants who are going to ask you those tough questions. And hopefully, as we said earlier, getting them to focus. If they're willing to spend the time with a consultant, they can cut back. Once they have the plan in place, it doesn't take a tremendous amount of care and feeding. It's taking that time for a period of time where you step back a little bit, work on this plan, and then you can go forward working in your business if that's what you desire. But the one point I will make to you is the most valuable business for sale is one where it's basically run by an absentee owner. Mm-hmm. To maximize your purchase price, the farther you can remove yourself from that, the more value potentially your business has.
Okay, and lastly, mistake number 6, talk about no plan to maximize value.
There are a couple of things that this really keys into. One is focus. You can't be, another chapter of the book, an inch wide and a mile deep. A mile wide and an inch deep, where you are, the question is, if you don't have a focused set of products that you are selling, it's going to be harder to sell the entire entity. So the idea of focusing, it's also constant looking at things like concentrating your resources on those things that have the best long-run profit margin, and except in the case where you're doing something as a loss leader, but refocusing how your finances are. A key piece, though, that I always tell clients is what I sort of intimated here. You want to become an absentee owner. Well, how do you become an absentee owner is you either have partners or key employees that you've golden handcuffed to the acquisition, that when you sell the business and you build up time with them, that's another way to, as I said, improve your credit risk with regard to if you do have to take back paper from your employees. Having key employees who are locked in will add value. In fact, if you can deliver an intact management team, it can add anywhere from 25 to 100 basis points, and you're even a multiplier, depending on who your acquirer is. So that's one. Looking at your financials is also looking at your financials to see if you are putting stuff out there that doesn't look good. And there are clearly ways, and this is why going through this with someone who knows what they're doing, to review your financials to see if you're putting your best foot forward with regard to a sale as well. So those are some of the areas that I would consider important and why you have to do it, why you should.
Stuart, talk about asset protection and estate planning and how they play key roles in M&A and exit planning.
Sure. There are really, I look at trusts in two forms. If you have, as we've talked about, the positive delta where the value of your assets exceeds your lifetime needs, the idea of transferring in some form equity to an irrevocable trust for the benefit of spouse and children allows the seller to effectively create a family bank where those proceeds come in, depending on the type of sale and also the type of trust you use. It's going to have generally the same tax consequences. It will have the same tax consequences on the sale of capital assets, but it has a slightly worse on the sale of ordinary income items. But the issue is that by passing it to the trust, you are putting an asset out there that is beyond the reach of creditors, can be borrowed back, as well as it grows outside your estate for the benefit of your children and potentially your grandchildren. With regards to those entrepreneurs who are looking at being serial, the idea of setting up what's known as a self-settling creditor-protected trust, where it does not do, quote, estate planning, but it is a great vehicle in order to protect the assets that you want to have and protect in order to, from creditors going forward. And this is a way to sort of take some assets off the table. And, what we're talking about here with the idea of, with this idea here is that it's not a new idea. It's really 300 years old. It's what the Rothschilds did. It's the concept of creating a family bank. It's the idea that you take a chunk of the proceeds, if you have them, and put it into a family bank where you have the right to borrow against it, but your children can use the income and principal, and it grows outside your estate. So it can serve as a marvelous vehicle in that sense.
Stuart, I'm going to ask you to share with the listeners how to reach you if they want to, but first, do you have any closing thoughts regarding expensive mistakes and as it pertains to M&A or exit planning?
I think it's very important that prior to putting your company on the market, that you have a plan for what you're going to do, and what you're selling, how you're going to sell it, and how you're going to minimize what Uncle Sam's going to take from you. I think too many people get caught up in, I'm going to sell the business, and they don't necessarily have an investment banker who's going to help them, and they put their business on the market with a business broker or through a friend, and they're shorting themselves tremendous amounts of money because they haven't put anything in place to really maximize value or make sure that the transaction actually closes.
If a business owner wants to reach you, Stuart, about M&A, asset protection, or estate planning, how would they go about doing that?
They can reach me by email at sorkin@shspc.com, or they can give me a call at my office at 301-320-1152, and they can find me on the web at stuartsorkin.com.
Stuart, I'm sure our listeners today have found you to be extremely helpful. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Listeners, we will be back within a month or so with another subject matter expert on exit planning. In the meantime, please consider visiting our website at nslp.com or give us a call at 301-943-8203 if we can help you think through building value or planning your exit so that you can exit successfully. Thank you.